Yo! Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of the comprehensive retrospective of Linkara's Lightbringer webcomic series. If you haven't already seen the first part, be sure to go check that one out first. But, with all that being said, let's jump right into it. Issue 6's cover showcases the new villain, the Darkbringer, in all of his glory, with the very next page teasing that none other than Lewis, the Linkara from the Angel Armor novels, is here, talking about everyone's favorite cat girl Endo over the phone no less. And just like where the fourth novel stopped off, he's here to help stop the Darkbringer. Meanwhile, Michelle is upset because she thinks Carter and Hannah are in a relationship, and basically fucking in the back room, even though in actuality they are just working together as Lightbringer teammates. And so they decide that maybe it's best to just let her know the truth about him being the Lightbringer and what exactly is going on. Also in the newspaper, there is also a reference to the grand finale of the fourth Angel Armor novel. Michelle and Hannah then have a heart-to-heart, mainly pertaining to Michelle being kinda snippy at Hannah, and how she's just looking out for her. And if her and Carter want to be in a relationship, she understands, and is okay with it. Hannah then begins to tell Michelle the truth about the situation before the restaurant they are in suddenly goes very dark. And then black tentacles break out from the ceiling. I think. The picture is actually a little bit hard to read if I'm being perfectly honest. Carter then sees on the TV that Hannah and Michelle are being held hostage, so of course he suits up to go and save them. Lightbringer then meets up with the police chief, and he basically just says that the guy doing this has made no demands, so they are worried that he is planning on killing the hostages. Also the whole time throughout these last few pages, Lewis has been schizophrenically jabbering about why this page has shading and this one doesn't, but the TLDR is sometimes he felt like shading and other times he just got lazy. What proceeds is this page of inner monologue between the Lightbringer and the Darkbringer, and sort of their backgrounds and their philosophies, and why they oppose each other, which I suppose we'll give a read. Quote, "I've never told Hannah this, but after my first night out as Lightbringer, I came back to the store and threw up all over the desk downstairs. For all my dramatic poses and one-liners I'd spew off after I took out a common criminal, the whole thing was terrifying me. I never told my former liege this, but my initial plans upon joining the darkness were to simply take its powers for my own ends. I gave my liege a song and dance about how I wanted to join his cause, but I knew in my heart I simply wanted to be more powerful than cops and gang thugs. I had made a choice about my parents' form of extreme pacifism, but you don't just abandon 15 years of beliefs easily. I had made my choice a long time ago to be a criminal, but then he said his magic words, and I met his god, and he became mine too. I spent the night tossing and turning to nightmares,
of my parents telling me I had betrayed them.
I spent an eternity conversing with the darkness, learning his will and his way. My liege told me later it was only a few seconds. It was at that moment my convictions were made whole.
The nightmares have stopped now, but sometimes even I have to turn the photos of my parents away from me when I go back to my home.
I know that if the darkness was still living today, he would be proud of me and of what I will achieve on this day. This false angel will pay for his presumption.
In the name of the light, I will punish you for what you have done and prove it was right to choose as I did.
In the name of the darkness, I will punish you for what you have done and prove I was right to choose as I did. Unquote. It's not a bad idea, actually. I do like that the Darkbringer's text bubbles are dark, so it reads much easier on the page as well here. Despite the page still being filled to the brim with the text boxes, again, I would have personally had a page where we get the Lightbringer's thoughts as he's flying towards the Darkbringer, and we get a separate page where we see the Darkbringer's inner monologue, with more pictures to actually follow along with these descriptions. Like one where he actually is standing before the darkness and his liege, that sort of thing would have been super duper cool. Maybe even in black and white, just to emphasize it was from the past or whatever. With a final third page where they meet up, both echoing the final points of each other in the same way it kind of did at the end of this page. Sometimes it's not always the content of the words that's the issue, it is the way in which they are presented that is the issue. And while it seems like Lewis wants these words, and in fact many of these philosophical encounters with villains to be dramatic, they are just simply presented far too matter-of-factually to truly hold any dramatic weight. And when there is no drama, the narrative also feels weightless. And thus these words that could have meant something, could have been that punch to something visually interesting, it just feels like blobs of words that are a chore to get through. Said it once and I'll say it again, presentation matters. And I'm not even dogging on specifically Lewis, but consider this as yet again one of my general personal writing tips that I think it is fair enough to apply to just about every person's writing regardless of the format or the genre of the story being told. If you're not presenting your story in a dramatic or visually interesting manner, why bother? At any rate, they then confront each other, after the Darkbringer drops a bunch of lore from the Angel Armor books that, as someone who has read those, understands what he's saying, but I imagine if you were just a casual reader of the comic, this would all kind of seem like a lot of words and ideas that are just being kind of tossed around out of nowhere. Then they talk, and the Darkbringer, in the most clunky way possible, literally says, "I am your antithesis, your opposite number," and over-explains himself in what is honestly just really bad dialogue. So then the hostages escape, and then we get this perspective from the Darkbringer about how he truly believes he is the good guy, in a similar fashion to how Varric the Destroyer and the Darkness from the Angel Armor novels also felt that they were the good guys as well, saying, quote,
"How do you fire those energy blasts?"
"Magics. I really don't understand much of the physics behind it, but the power is flowing through me, the power of the darkness."
"Quit the mustache twirling and make sense."
"Mustache twirling? Ah, I see. You think I'm the evil one. That when I speak of darkness, I talk metaphorically. You think that because I inconvenienced a few restaurant patrons, that I'm a being of evil. Yet it's you who give people false hope that someone is going to rescue them, that good deeds will ultimately lead to good returns, or that light is the pathway to salvation. I was a common criminal once, you know, no better than a rat who stole crumbs to make out a meager living, but then I met a prophet. I read his holy book and underwent a ceremony to change me. His god was known as the Darkness. He spoke to me and revealed the majesty and horror that is the world of good and evil, and of people like you. People like you delude yourself into thinking that the struggle of good versus evil will end, but it doesn't. There will always be some new evil or injustice to fight. The fight of good versus evil is a stalemate. But the darkness knew the truth. Instead of rejecting those evil forces, you embrace them, twisting them to fit the greater good. To truly defeat evil, you must become dark. And the darkness shielded us from evil while we joined with it. A cloak made of black steel. We can commit evil acts while keeping ourselves clean. We were cleansed of false idols and of the hypocrisies of people like you. I wonder if you even understand the depth of your wickedness. Your presumption and hypocrisy in things like hope and light. It sickens me. You believe in hope and light. But where is your payoff, hero? Where is the triumph of the good of light? I have wasted more than enough time in the stench of your inquisitiveness. Burn, false angel. Unquote. So basically, the Darkbringer just adds a bunch of context and brings people up to speed about his backstory, and what have you from, yet again, the 4th Angel Armor novel, while again spitting his ideals. Something which Lewis notes more upon in the author's note. Quote, "Wow, an artsy shot. We haven't had one of those in a while." And yes, inquisitiveness is a word. This was one of the few pages of the comic that I actually scripted out. Not a highly detailed one, mind you, but the dialogue needed to be worked in right. See, it's difficult for me to come up with the philosophy/religion of the darkness, beyond what has been seen in my books, and even then, it's been mostly about rejecting happiness. Since I don't believe in the same things as the darkness, my logical little mind has trouble coming up with rationalizations for the terrible things that followers of the darkness do. Not that I agree with the rationalizations, since they believe themselves to be morally perfect. The original scripting for this page had a lot of text bubbles, so many that I fear if I had included everything, the entire page would have just been text. As such, I made sure to streamline it down, and I actually like the results here. Okay, we've got the baseline for the Darkbringer's beliefs here, so now let's examine why he thinks heroism and the light are wrong in the next 2 pages. Unquote. What I find really funny about this is how Lewis almost looks at making sure the audience understands the philosophy of the villain as a thing to be checkmarked, which, while interesting, I think is going to be pretty clunky no matter how you do it when it's their very first appearance in the story. Some mystery, I think, goes a long way. Vague posting truly is a virtue at times when it comes to villains, rather than just exposition dumps like this. I personally quite like knowing the villain's philosophy, even if it's simply nothing at all. They just like doing evil shit. But regardless, I think that's something that's best maybe alluded to at first, rather than showcased instantaneously like it is here, and pretty much every other villain that the Lightbringer has faced off against thus far. Once again, I think this may come down to the fact that Lewis isn't a very good artist, and thus fight scenes are not going to be his forte. But because these are supposed to be confrontations, I think Lewis's solution to not being able to do fight scenes so well is to have very little of an actual fight scene and have the actual confrontation be more of a argument, which is much easier for him to do because it just requires text. This is actually a pretty common practice when it comes to writing novels. You can have action scenes, but at some point it is just going to be reading descriptions of people's movements, and that can get boring. So oftentimes arguments or conversations are much more interesting for an actual confrontation in a novel. However, yet again, when it comes to comic books, it is less interesting, unless also paired with some strong visuals to really drive the words home. But anyway, then the Darkbringer gets some good shots in on Lightbringer, followed by, oh my fucking god, the most text bubble riddled page I have ever seen in this comic thus far, followed by a crazy fucking long author's note. Okay, well, let's fucking go. Let's hear what this Darkbringer has to say now. Quote, "You know what I'm doing to you, hero? I'm letting you experience the true corruption and perversity of the earth. Since the darkness's magics are connected to it, I can tap into it and unleash every horrible evil upon you that this dreadful world has to offer. It is truly evil to believe that hope prevails, that light overtakes dark, that you need to embrace love and joy and happiness. Every victim of a crime has their hope crushed. Every person who has clung to light has been swept away in darkness. Love, joy, and happiness only lead to lust, bitterness, and envy. Your hypocrisy is clear. You believe in all the things that lead to evil. Why do you continue to defend this twisted world? You call yourself a superhero. It is a childish thing meant only for the impotent to cling to before they are eradicated by the strong. Everyone on this world takes joy from the suffering of others, be it in a comedy, the sexually deviant, or enjoying the drama of a tragedy. I wonder, as a child, did your parents fill you with immature dreams and fairy tales of happily ever after? Of doing the right thing for the sake of the right thing? Tell me, hero, is taking pleasure from something horrible good or evil? Well, allow the darkness to cast a shadow over these blinding, childish notions. There is no happily ever after. We lead lives of pain and sorrow that bring us to our deaths in a bleak and meaningless universe. And doing the right thing for the sake of the right thing? It doesn't matter how many people are rescued, how many sins are atoned for, or how much freedom is given to the oppressed. There will always be another life destroyed around the corner, a new sin to be committed, another set of chains to be placed on an innocent. I almost pity you, but then I remember the words of the darkness. No mercy for the wicked, no pity for the weak, and no sympathy for the unremarkable, for they shall use your charities as chains to drag you down with them as they descend into the pit. Now, burn, you abomination! Unquote. As known before, this is followed up by an author's note. Quote, there wasn't enough room to explore this within the pages itself. So let me try and explain why exactly the Darkbringer believes the Lightbringer is evil. The Darkbringer believes that the binary nature of good and evil forces them into a stalemate, that good cannot completely triumph over evil, and that evil cannot fully conquer good. However, because the two forces are forever locked in opposition, there must be a reason why one is not stronger than the other. The Darkbringer believes that might is right, as indicated above. In a twisted way, he believes that because good and evil cannot reconcile with each other, one can lead to the other. After all, the promise of good is that it will eventually defeat evil, that it will be a shining light over that cannot be forever blotted out. Since it is, in the eyes of the Darkbringer, an impossibility, it makes the idea of good into a lie. Since good is then committing an act of evil by lying, it indicates that maybe good and evil are of a similar nature, or at least that being purely good is a hypocrisy. As such, the only way to end such a dilemma is to knowingly adopt the methods of the opponent. Ergo, one must become partially evil in order to destroy true evil. He then believes that his soul will not be tarnished by the evil he commits because the darkness protects it. But since he also knows that those who claim to be of the light, of the pure and good, are also hypocrites, and no better than pure evil itself, he thinks that they are equally his enemy and must be destroyed. Unquote. Oh my god, alright, I fucking get it already! It's clear that Lewis really wanted us, the audience, to understand why the Darkbringer thought of himself as good. To the point that I feel like the point has been overstated and just feels like it's wasting too much time over explaining it now. Again, same point I said earlier. Some mystery and vagueness go a long way of villains. But anyway, the Lightbringer responds to this assault of words, like this. Quote,
images flash before my eyes. I see children slaughtered, women raped, and men surrendering to avarice, greed, and cowardice. I see every terrible thing on earth, and I want to throw up, to scream and just surrender to the pain and horror, but my body won't let me, because overriding my disgust and fear is my anger. I see this horrible disregard for everything I believe in, and I am enraged by the Darkbringer. I will not surrender to this. You do not embrace evil or darkness. You fight them. Go to hell. to hell. What was that? I didn't quite hear you. Go to hell! Unquote. This is followed up by an action sequence all play out on this one page through all these panels. And it's bad, but you already knew that. But in the end, the Darkbringer wins this fight, tossing the Lightbringer off of the building. He says some stuff about how there won't be another hero like him, a legacy hero like in the DC Comics since he's the only superhero, and that when he dies, the only one who will remain is the Darkbringer. However, in the next panel, the Lightbringer tries to focus and work to save himself from death, but he isn't able to focus. Thoughts of his mom, dad, and Hannah come to his mind. And just as the Darkbringer is getting ready to revel in his victory, at the last moment, the Lightbringer is saved by a familiar face. It's none other than Lewis, the Linkara, the hero of the Angel Armor book series. And Lewis, the author's first self-insert, which means, by the way, that this comic now has two self-inserts by Lewis the author. That's gotta be a record or something. But with that being said, so ends issue 6, so let's move on to issue 7. Issue 7 shows a cover where our brave self-inserts are shaking hands as the Darkbringer comes in to use like a wrestling move or something on them. It's here that we get a flashback to Carter's childhood about how he wasn't allowed to read comic books because they gave him a false narrative about angels coming down to save them when pacifism is the only way or fucking whatever. Well, now here Carter is looking to have just been saved by a literal angel. Then Lewis fucking does this bit that's like a reference to V for Vendetta, but instead of every word starting with V, it starts with L because his name is Lewis the Linkara. Yeah. Lovely. Let me loosen lips and light the lamp of legend. This locus of leaps and lacerations locks lords of light against lawbreakers. I loom here to lighten the load and lift you from languishment. Of late, I have learned of a lineage of lore lasting lifetimes, when not loitering about a literal locale. Leer if you like, but our lot loves the lavishly ludicrous. Luminous lucidity is my lodestar, as is yours. So let me just say, it is my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me Lewis. Unquote. So then the two decide to team up against the Darkbringer, which, for those of you who watched my Angel Armor video, know that this was the goal of Lewis that he had at the end of the 4th book, yada yada yada. So they advance up, Lightbringer questioning where Lewis came from a bit, then they both cockily taunt the Darkbringer, then Lewis charges forward with his gauntlet swords, only for the Lightbringer to stop him, shooting a light blast at him, and allowing time for the Darkbringer to escape. Then the two argue because apparently the Lightbringer thought that Linkara was gonna stab the Darkbringer in the face with his, gauntlet sword, when actually Linkara was gonna stab his shoulder. And of course the Lightbringer doesn't want villains to die or whatever. But anyway, after the bickering, they then go after the Darkbringer. Then the two talk about the past, and Lewis gives a very abridged version of his story from the Angel Armor novels. And we even get this cool little official sketch of Endo. He notes how he has killed many before, but realized back then that killing was not the answer. And Lightbringer asks him how he can trust he won't kill again, to which Linkara asks Lightbringer if he reads comics. And then he says, Cassandra Cain, and this makes the Lightbringer trust him, for some reason. This is luckily explained in the author's notes. Quote, Cassandra Cain is the 3rd woman to be Batgirl. She also had a strict moral code that resulted after she had killed someone as a child and realized how wrong it was to kill. Hence the connection in the above page. Unquote. Which, fair enough, I guess. It's just kind of funny how they are both such fucking nerds that the way they gain each other's trust is by randomly referencing a plot point in some fucking comic book they both read. Couple of fucking stinky ass Reddit mods over here, I swear. Anyway, they find the Darkbringer, break into where he's at, and they start fighting him, to which he holds his own fairly well against the two, and he seems to stab his black tentacles right into the Lightbringer, seemingly killing him. He also has a fair bit of dialogue here, which I'll go ahead and read. Quote, They're here. Good. I panicked when I was suddenly encountering 2 enemies. but I am prepared now. Let it be ended. Let there be tragedy. Let there be pain. Let there be sorrow. Let there be horror. No! Let there be an end to childish things. Let there be death. Lightbringer! Wham! Let there be shadows overtaking the light. Let the glorious dead be avenged. My liege cut off your arm, and yet you managed to grow it back. Let's see if it'll happen again with your head. Let there be darkness. Unquote. Then he gets ready to stab the Linkara, but it turns out that the Lightbringer wasn't dead yet, and he slaps some cuffs on the Darkbringer, which seems to stop him in his tracks from being able to use his dark magic powers. Somehow. This was absolutely not fucking established in any other part of the comic and makes literally zero sense. Like, is there just magic handcuffs that suddenly make all magical abilities not work anymore? Would those also work on the Lightbringer, or do they specifically work on the Darkbringer? And if they do only specifically work on the Darkbringer, who invented those? How did the Lightbringer have them? So many questions, and absolutely no answers. So he then takes down the Darkbringer, knocking him out, and, is it just me, or did you also notice that these last couple pages have been flowing a little bit better? Not nearly as much useless dialogue. And the art even looks just a little bit better here? Interesting. Sadly, though, it seems Lightbringer is still dying due to his wounds. But then he wakes up perfectly fine, I guess. I don't know if he eventually healed himself due to his own powers of light, or if the Linkara healed him through some kind of magic. It doesn't really say, which is weird, but regardless, the day is won, and the two then bond over their love for comic books. They then talk about the Scarlet Witch or some shit, and then they part ways. Linkara most likely going back to meet up with Endo and the rest of his friends to go back to the world of sin, to recreate Camelot or whatever. Meanwhile, the Lightbringer goes home, and has this whole bit of dialogue with his dead parents. Quote, "Mom, Dad, I'm home. Boy, you wouldn't believe the day I had. Hannah was kidnapped by the psycho. I almost didn't make it out, but it turns out I'm not the only superhero out there. Damn it all. Yes, I had to hurt him. He was trying to kill me. You can't just leave guys like that to the police. They weren't equipped to deal with his powers. I'm sorry. I just can't deal with this right now. It's been too long a day. Good night." Unquote. Interesting. I suppose this is addressing the fact that Carter pretty much threw away his upbringing and stuff like instantly in the first issue, which I and many others, including the forum members, pointed out as being kind of weird and rushed. And just overall, this issue was a lot better than the one before it. Part 2 of The Darkness, I mean. By chapter's end, while still not necessarily good, the drawings seem to have a bit more care put into them. There are less text boxes all over the place. And the fight scene in the factory, or whatever that was supposed to be, was much more well done than the one on top of the building, or any others before that for that matter. You can actually see a visual improvement to Lewis's skills as both an artist and the way he is going about presenting this comic. Things are actually maybe starting to look up a bit. Well, let's see if this trend continues as we move on into issue 8. But first, another small detour. I wanted to note this before, but in between these issues, there has been a ton of fan art made around the Lightbringer, and quite a few of these are actually really cool. It's actually very wholesome to see that Lewis made sure to highlight each and every piece of fan art that he got. Someone even made him in the City of Heroes, that old MMORPG where you can play as your own custom-made superhero that no longer exists. He also made this short little comic that I won't bother reading in full, where the Lightbringer meets up and fights with this guy named Mr. Threat, and this was actually his contribution at the time to a far larger collaboration called The Crossover Wars, which at first I thought was just a small collaboration between him and the guy who created this character. But I was actually completely wrong, and this is a
far more elaborate crossover than I could have expected. And as a matter of fact, there is an entire website dedicated to this crossover war thing. And as their page denotes, quote, "The Crossover Wars, largest webcomic crossover project so far. Welcome to the central hub for the 2007 webcomic event known as the Crossover Wars. Here has been gathered the comic strips marked by the conflict as it spread across the continuums. If you wish to read the strips as they went up, have your pick at the daily reports. However, if you want to try and follow a certain storyline through all the webcomics it touched, feel free to browse among the various storylines below. By the Warmongers." Unquote. Lewis participated in particular in the Super Wars, war, but there's also an Adult Wars, Fantasy Wars, Forum Wars, all sorts of things. And this would eventually lead to Lewis Lovhaug leading the charge in a much bigger crossover collaboration by the name of Crossover Lord, which you can actually see the first cover of here, which notes "in worlds undreamt of, in realms unexplored, smiling in shadows. The Cross Overlord" by Ida Kirkengard, Abby Lurk, Lewis Lovhaug, Neil Purcell, Al Schrodner, and Remus Shepard. Now, what's interesting is I was actually reached out by a few of the other creators of this crossover comic for context regarding the story, because, believe it or not, this Crossover Lord comic is actually where the Smiling Man, you know, that super powerful hat-wearing guy a few issues ago that seemed to have mysterious motivations, that guy? Well, what if I told you that he only ever appears in the Lightbringer comic itself like one more time after that appearance? And his story, and thus part of the Lightbringer narrative, is actually finished in this collaboration comic, because that's indeed the case. Indeed, almost no one ever brings up this piece of lore about the Lightbringer series, either. However, this is also a series that has a lot of different artists and their own superheroes and villains that they have created, and thus their own batches of lore, their own webcomic series to go through. And to really talk about this crossover lore comic properly, I would have to go through and talk about at least the introductory to almost all of these other webcomic heroes and series, which is well, this whole Lightbringer series and Linkara book series is already a bit of an extended side tangent of the main Channel Awesome retrospective. So I'm gonna be real with you guys and gals, I just can't fucking do that, man. A guy's gotta know its limits, you know? However, what I can say is that the Crossover Lord and the crossover namesake is actually the Smiling Man. Indeed, the main villain of this crossover is Lewis's creation. However, despite this, most of Lewis's ideas regarding the Smiling Man never really went into this comic. Well, at least for its conclusion. See, Lewis's backstory for the Smiling Man, that again only appears in this crossover comic, was that the Smiling Man was a reality-crossing serial killer who murdered every incarnation of the Lightbringer across the multiverse, except for the one who stars in the Lightbringer webcomic. Thus, why he acted like he had met the Lightbringer before in that issue, because he literally had met and killed every other version of the Lightbringer. And so for this crossover comic, the overseer of the multiverse, named Ringo apparently, summoned all these heroes from multiple realities to team up to try and stop the Smiling Man. However, none of these superheroes could even touch the Smiling Man. So how are they going to be able to defeat him? Well, that's where Lewis's idea came in. Since, again, this was originally his idea, this whole crossover, the concept for defeating the Smiling Man was for all the heroes, including the Lightbringer, to basically go to an armory and get a bunch of upgrades that would beef up their powers to defeating the Smiling Man, including the Lightbringer getting a homing shot thing for his gloves that would make his light hit the Smiling Man. However, the others thought that this would be far too simple of an approach, and that it may kind of come off as a cheap way of defeating such an unstoppable villain just by getting some new stuff kind of out of fucking nowhere. Which, I agree, that would have been really fucking stupid. They instead decided to focus on a part of the backstory for the Smiling Man's motivation that Lewis came up with. See, Lewis wanted the Smiling Man's motivation for doing all of this to be revenge for the death of his wife. but apparently he didn't have a super compelling backstory for the Smiling Man's wife, Rachel, and so one of the other writers of Crossover Lord, Remus Shepard, created a backstory for the Smiling Man's wife in which her travels through the multiverse caused multiple versions of herself to converge into one being, a state which forced the Overseer Ringo to erase her from reality, which of course pissed off the Smiling Man since that was his wife, so he decides to start using multiverse trickery to take it over, destroy Ringo, and, well, yeah, get revenge. Through this narrative idea that they ended up defeating the Smiling Man, as one of the characters eventually give the Smiling Man his wife's journal, one of the last remaining things of her existing at all. It's basically her memoir, and a warning about the danger she discovered in traveling the multiverse. And it's this revelation that apparently morally defeated the Smiling Man, making him realize that all of this was pointless, and that he needs to learn to move on without her, and that she definitely would not want him doing all of this for her sake. So in other words, they basically defeat the Crossover Lord not through sheer power, but by getting him to see the wrong in his actions, and that this isn't what his wife would have wanted, which is actually pretty cool in my opinion, as far as villain defeats go. Mind you, I am simplifying things a bit, and if you want to see all this play out for yourself, I recommend just going and giving the crossover comic a read. Especially if you're a super big Linkara, Lightbringer fanatic that just wants to know everything there is about everything with it, it's definitely worth reading through. However, I must also note that many of the other writers involved with the Crossover Lord mention how midway through or so the development of this comic, Lewis allegedly kind of just ghosted them and sort of left them all to finish the project, or was involved with it very little at some point, despite the whole thing originally kind of being Lewis's idea, and also pertaining primarily around his character, the Smiling Man. And this shift from him being extremely involved to not being involved at all by the story's end was because Lewis was apparently quite busy. With what, you may ask? Well, you probably already guessed it, it was with making the Atop the Fourth Wall show, which again, according to them, he never informed any of them that he was doing this at the time, and they only found out about it by one of the group members stumbling across it sometime later, meaning the conclusive arc to this Smiling Man story seemingly was done by them with no real involvement from Lewis, which is a bizarre outcome to say the least. Later on, as we get close to the end of this webcomic, you will also note that the Atop the Fourth Wall series definitely took precedent over his own webcomic as well, by like a lot. It was, admittingly, pretty shitty for Lewis to just kind of abandon everyone with this big crossover thing, and not even let them know any of the stuff that he was doing in the meantime. But, you know, people change, new priorities are eventually set, and with how much success and newfound attention he was getting through this series, it's very understandable to me why he would set his focus on that rather than the random webcomics that, as far as his involvement in any of it was going, or his own webcomic, he was mostly just getting mockery and criticism for, and not a whole lot of praise. Nonetheless, it seems like everyone involved eventually got to use it as their own creative outlet to tell a pretty interesting story by the Crossover Lord's end, and I should hope that no one has any true ill will towards anyone by the end, since it's almost been 20 years at this point, I suppose. All the same though, still a very interesting little piece of trivia regarding Lewis, the Lightbringer comic, and his greater role in the community he was a part of, and how he kind of abandoned it. But anyway, enough about crossovers and creative differences. Let's get back into the Lightbringer comic proper. On to issue 8, which seems to be completely from Hannah Ment's perspective, opening on her waking up from bed, all groggy and saying how she hates mornings and shit. You'll also notice that there is a new artist name, Fred Goldart this time, which Lewis explains in the author's note, quote, "New artist? Wow! Well, okay, it's still me, but as you've seen, the artwork has taken a bit of a change, and as such, I decided to reflect that in the title page. While recent reviews have recommended that I drop the pseudonym pseudonym art credits title. Upon later considerations, I decided to keep it. Can anyone guess where I got this name from? Here's a hint. It's an anagram. Unquote. Yeah, pretty silly, but whatever. We then get this inner monologue from her about life sucking and shit. Quote, Men's War Journal. Whatever sick, twisted supervillain invented mornings should die. Life freaking sucks because of mornings. Then again, Michelle's singing doesn't exactly make me happy to be alive. Life sucks. I've got to convince Carter to take the patrol down to 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. because this is seriously starting to bug me, and he was doing this even before I signed on. No wonder he has lines under his eyes. Life sucks. Same routine every day. I get up, I take a shower, I change clothes, I go to the kitchen, I go to work. Life freaking sucks. And there's Michelle. Every day for the past month, she's been like this chipper. She starts off the day bright and cheery, with a song in her heart and a new hairstyle on her head. No, she's always like this, even before she and I were rescued, if you can call it that, by the Lightbringer. I don't know how she can stand it all. Dear God in heaven, I hate mornings. Unquote. Well, ain't she a chipper bitch? Also, Lewis notes, quote, I'm not exactly sure when it was decided to make Michelle so busty. I guess it was just one attempt to make her look more unique. Plus it adds into why she wouldn't want Hannah back in issue 4 to buy a breast enlarger. Unquote. So yeah, but this is all just a setup for a joke where she finally gets her coffee in the morning. Now she's like, light freaking rules! She goes on saying how coffee is the nectar of the soul or whatever, and then Michelle vaguely asks if Hannah can tell her something good, which she says never mind too quickly after, puzzling Hannah with exactly why she asked her to do that. They then remark on how they enjoy their job, and how they have been worrying about Carter lately, and how the Lightbringer is going to have to appear for a trial case for general wares, I guess. This panel is definitely Lewis trying new angles and stuff, which I commend the effort for, even if it's, yet again, totally broken perspective-wise. He also addresses some criticism in the author's note here. Quote, one of the criticisms I've received for Lightbringer is the fact that sometimes I tend to write too much dialogue, or text for a page. It's part of the problem from transitioning to a novel/prose style of writing to a comic, which usually has a limit of around 28 words per panel. Sometimes it's just hard to break that habit, when I have so much to say. Unquote. Well, I mean, I'm glad by this point he's at least heard the issue out and is trying to break the habit. Again, commendable. As for if he will actually continue trying to not do that or not, it remains to be seen. But so far so good. Anyway, Michelle almost walks into the downstairs area where the Lightbringer stuff is at, and Hannah stops her before she can go down there. Luckily, Carter saves her the trouble and makes an excuse for Hannah to go and get the thing that they need from down there instead of Michelle. He then remarks how there are good, bad, and totally bad customers that come to the store. Then later she remarks how they really need to get a secret base or something for the Lightbringer stuff, since it will become easy for Michelle and maybe others to find it here. Then in the next page, Hannah notes about how Carter is always waxing philosophical with her, and her thoughts about him doing that, I guess. Quote, he gives me this lecture at least once a week. It's the ethical imperative of violence to stop evil speech. I swear he waxes philosophical so often you can see your reflection in his skin. Sometimes I think he's just trying to justify it to himself. Carter, get it through your head. I don't do this out of some sense of objective, morality, or crap like that. I do it because I want to help people. Unquote. Then she notes how sometimes there can be an hour or so where she won't hear from the Lightbringer because he is quietly staking out a place or fighting someone, etc. And thus, she takes this time as a break and starts wailing on a punching bag, playing opera music as loud as she can. However, she then hears the Lightbringer over the comm, and he says that one of the bad guys injected him with fucking heroin. And so she suits up to go and help him, and calls the police to help in the situation as well. By suit up, by the way, I meant she puts a fucking bag over her head. So anyway, they then go and pick up the Lightbringer, and he's all kinds of fucked up at the moment, and then takes him back to base, making sure to protect his identity and what have you. Then, when he does finally wake up, he's angry that Hannah went and saved him, and how she could have been hurt if any of those gang members had woken up, which pisses her off to no end. And so she kind of lets him have it at this point. Quote,
You will not put yourself in unnecessary danger again. That's an order.
I think we need to make something clear between us.
I am not your sidekick.
I am not your slave. I am not your soldier. I am not your assistant. I am not your companion or your butler or your employee when we're down here. And I am sure as hell not someone who takes orders from you. We are partners. Powers are not. We are equals. Clear?
Crystal, well, obviously we've both had a stressful night. Why don't we take the next 2 days off? Both in the store and down here.
Sounds good to me, boss. Unquote. So yeah, and the chapter ends with Hannah looking to become a full-fledged hero, I guess a kind of sidekick for the Lightbringer in the future. Overall, this issue was kind of not much, but I did kind of appreciate getting to know Hannah the character a little bit more. I would even say I sort of like her character to some degree. I don't really have much to say about this issue. So, on to the next one. So, technically before issue 9, there are 2 guest stories that come out first. One by Eric Lemon, who for sure has a pretty interesting art style, but since this isn't written by Lewis, I don't really care and will be skipping over it. There's also a guest story by Vinny D, who again has a very interesting style, but if Lewis didn't write it, then who fucking cares? I'm only here for the real deal, baby. And also there's this very, interesting picture and interaction here I thought I'd note. Quote, funny story behind this piece of fan art from Ann Onimus of the Watch fame. Over on the Super Dickory forum, there was a discussion going on about, well, support for female superheroes. He's talking about stuff for their boobs, by the way. I supplied a theory about an inbuilt support in costumes, but that I didn't know much about how uncomfortable any such thing would be, seeing as I lacked the proper chest. And then subsequently PM'd me and told me such things were dangerous to say around her. I started to ask her what she meant before it suddenly occurred to me and I began to run. Seeing as my avatar over there was Lightbringer, she then sent me the above work. Thus I was kagirled. Subsequently, I realized she still hasn't changed me back. Unquote. Okay. But weird fetish shit aside, onto the actual issue 9. And the author's note on this one makes it out to be a real epic story. The first 3-parter of the comic thus far, noting, quote, and we're back. Sorry for the lengthy hiatus, but it was necessary to get everything ready. Prepare for an intense 3-parter where questions are asked, questions are answered, and plot threads that started a year ago are finally realized. Unquote. With all that said, let's see it unfold then. The chapter starts with Lightbringer visiting General Wares in prison, and he has an edgy speech about how he's been keeping the city alive, and just kind of repeating the same stuff he said before, and noting how his lawyers plan on getting him out of prison for the illegal stuff that the Lightbringer did to him, beating him up and what have you, I guess. Then Lightbringer asks him why he started all this to begin with, and Ware simply tells him that there is no answer that would satisfy Lightbringer. But regardless, he would never tell him the true answer anyway. All while this mysterious woman in a blue robe walks out from the shadows. Meanwhile, Hannah is building this radiant manor or fucking whatever, while Lightbringer is running errands for this upcoming trial, including hiring Carrie, who is, I guess a lawyer. Co-Poet is also getting ready to go to the trial as well, and, sees something about a prison escape or something, and Carter is taking this character Sandy out on a date or something, and Hannah is mad, and, it's like a lot of info on one page, as you can see, but whatever. But anyway, then Sandy tells Carter about a paper she's writing about the masks we all wear and basically Jungian psychology stuff. which Carter as the Lightbringer is all too familiar with. Then the Lightbringer watches as General Wares is being moved from the prison to the courthouse for the trial, and making sure no one tries to take a shot at him since he wants justice to be served properly, only for something to be spotted speeding by through the sand. It's the blue-robed girl from before, and she seems just as pissed off at Lightbringer as she is General Wares. So she quickly uses her super speed to jump up and punch Lightbringer in the stomach. So the two fight, resulting in Lightbringer catching her in a big wall of light so he can question her. He asks her who she is, and she reveals that her name is Lady Anal Emma. Yeah. And so she says that the people that did this to her wanted to create someone like the Lightbringer, but before he can question her more, another masked figure punches him from behind. This one goes by Power Glove. He takes fucking Lady Anal with him towards a portal, noting that there are some people who will want to meet her, but not before Lightbringer steals the glove from that man with his light powers. Then later, Carter and Hannah take a look at the glove, and she has him look at an article released by the FBI about the stories of most of the freed victims of the slavers. And then we are quickly thrown into the next page where I guess General Ware's lawyer is making a defense for him and what have you. And man, this issue's plot feels really fucking manic. If it feels like I've been rushing through this issue, I guarantee you that that's just how this whole issue is paced. I guess the upside is things are constantly going on and it's at least kind of interesting. It's hard to focus in on any particular detail. However, from here, we then see the Lightbringer and the co-poet discuss the info in that article, and I'll just read the pages for this. Quote, "Heyas, long time no see, Lightbringer. Listen, I wish I was here under better circumstances, but I had to come tell you.
Linda Sherman.
What?
An elementary school teacher here in Pharos. She was kidnapped by the slavers about a year ago. She was sold to a paramilitary group engaging in experiments, ones designed to instill abilities in ordinary human beings. When the slavers were stopped, funding for the operation ceased. There was a fire at their base. Everyone supposedly died in it. Yet somehow the FBI had records about the 100 people who participated in the experiments, including the only one who survived the actual experiments. First of all, I wasn't involved in that. Secondly, if this is about the government wanting to have superpowered soldiers, I don't give a damn about that.
considering what I'm capable of, I'd be surprised if you didn't pursue it. What I do care about is the fact that the FBI knew damn well about the experiments, and they did nothing to help those people. There was no legal way to arrest the people responsible, or search their base.
Damn the law. Those people needed help.
If we had gone in at that point, the slavers could have had them out of jail in a day. We needed to build the case against them, or else we couldn't stop them totally. It's like when I said, the first time I met you, sometimes the law fails.
Then you should have followed my example in the first place.
Tell me, do you even have any inkling of how many people in high places don't like you because of that example?
The day I actually do this in order to be liked is the day I fail everyone.
Damn it, Lightbringer, you didn't give me a chance to tell you why I came here. I came to warn you, unquote. And the plot thickens. Then Hannah and the Lightbringer bicker over if he was too cold to the co-poet or not, and Hannah explains how she's slowly trying to figure out what the Power Glove does. Meanwhile, Lady Anal meets up with this mysterious figure in shadows who is assembling a team who wish to punish evildoers and those that protect them. And so she meets the team consisting of Power Glove, Lacey Boyle, Legato Sin, Bruiser, and fucking Fire Demon. Ending issue 9. Issue 10 sees this new cast of fellas standing over what I'm gonna assume is soon to be the Lightbringer. We then get this explanation of a couple of these characters' backstories, so Lady Anal here feels more at home. Quote, "You've said surprisingly little. I'm not certain about all of this. Why? I don't trust most of them, and I don't trust you. I don't even understand how some of them are even here. Legato Sin used to be a prize-winning pianist, but a sickly person, a gangster, kidnapped her, replaced her hands with metal, and cured her ailments. She was to be used as a weapon. She resisted, and now continues to seek revenge for victims like her. There shouldn't be any children involved in this. They shouldn't, but she does have a stake in this. Lacey was a direct victim of General Wares.
And that man?
Bruiser was a special ops military man, but later joined the Pharos PD. He was a good cop in a place where gangs punished good cops. His children were murdered right in front of him. Now he's sworn to avenge them by ridding the city of crime. Unquote. Interesting. But there's also a very big author's note below. So let's give it a read, shall we? Quote, sometimes the problem with long-term planning is that things occur between the time the idea is originally thought up and the time the actual story comes along. Take, for example, the villain contest. When I originally conceived it, I don't know the things I know now. For example, the fact that I became a feminist between that point and this has caused me to become a bit more squeamish when it comes to the origins of female characters. It's why I pushed White Death's story out of issue 8 slot until I could revise it to not make it such a gendered story with a cliched trope, though I kept the idea of the story from Hannah's perspective, plus her yelling at Carter. However, I also made a promise for those who took the time to participate and won the villain contest that I'd follow through with their characters. Although I've made minor tweaks here and there to make them fit better into the Lightbringer universe. Had I known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have even created the Slavers. They would have just been some gang. However, I do believe in acknowledging my failures and simply trying to build something better out of it. As a result, we have 3 female villains, who are all villains only because they're victims. Sure, we have Bruiser, who's also a victim, but he's only a victim because someone else got directly hurt. As such, hopefully by the end of this 3-parter, I'll be able to make something good out of my mistakes. Because if I don't, I'll just be throwing more mistakes onto the pile, and I hate it when I make mistakes. Unquote.
Ruh-oh, Raggy.
Someone is a feminist now and is afraid to write female characters. That is, feminist online friends might not like. That is actually a very funny perspective to come to. In becoming a feminist, now he is afraid to write female characters, period. This development is whatever. I'm not sure what he's even going on about, since the problem with the Slavers was that they were unrealistic and cartoonishly evil, and fucking dumb at that. Not the concept of people who human traffic people, because you know, that is something that actually does happen. It doesn't make you misogynistic to write about that. It just makes you an incompetent writer when you can't write it correctly, or make it seem realistic or have any logical sense. Lewis was just too young and inexperienced to do the concept any justice, but the same can be said for nearly every plot thread and element of this story. But I guess we'll see how this perspective changes his writing from this point forward. The Shadow Man then goes on to explain that the Power Glove is a mercenary guy and the Fire Demon is literally just a fire demon he summoned to have help them. And so they plan their attack against Lightbringer. Meanwhile, Lightbringer is talking with the police chief about how he's upset that Serpent is going to get off easy with just 6 years in prison by testifying against General Wares, since they were both bad men, and it could even be argued that Serpent did even more things bad than General Wares. But the police chief says that they needed his testimony to ensure Wares gets the maximum sentence, and is ultimately put away for good. The Lightbringer understands, but still hates the compromise. And then we cut to him arriving at the courthouse, take the stand and testify against General Wares, to much fanfare and pictures. And when he does take the stand and says that his name is Lightbringer, this is immediately objected to by General Ware's lawyer, since he is technically committing perjury, not saying his true name. That's when Carrie, the lawyer that Lightbringer hired earlier, comes in to help him out. After she lists off why he can choose to keep his privacy, Lightbringer goes on to tell the story of what happened, after which the following exchange is had. Quote,
At which point the general was arrested.
No further questions. Tell me, what other methods of fighting Mr. Wares did you consider besides throwing him through a window?
I don't know what you mean.
Like, through something other than violence. Something more like pacifism.
Sir, pacifism can work wonders. It's an active tool that can and has been used to stop many forms of oppression.
Then why didn't you...
Because I have faced drug dealers, rapists, murderers, and monsters. I have fought a man who claimed to be Jack the Ripper. I have battled a thief who wielded dark powers. And if you think that pacifism would have stopped Wares or any other evildoer like him, then your head is quite frankly stuck in the clouds.
Unquote. Now, after this, there's a rather interesting author's note that extends beyond just this page and really the comic as a whole. Quote, "Consider this my apology page for the remarks about pacifism early in the comic. I know it's not the best thing, and it comes off kind of stilted in the way the question is framed, but there you have it. Pacifism can be useful in the right situations, but in Pharos City, it isn't. Actually, this page is an example of a flaw I've noted before. I don't script a lot of these beforehand. I have a vague idea of what's going to be said when I draw it, but most of the time the actual words aren't there. As a result, I'll draw something in reference to something I had originally planned on saying, but then it gets cut out. Like for example, the chains behind Lightbringer in the third panel. I was going to make a reference to the Legacy of Chains thing that Wares would rather see me in chains type of dialogue, but it didn't make it. Plus, I rewrote this twice because originally Lightbringer was going on for a bit about why pacifism works in other situations, but doesn't in Pharos' case, and it sounded even more forced than this dialogue. If I had actually drawn a second page for Lightbringer answering questions on the stand, we would have seen a bit more of him talking about why there needs to be superheroes in this world, unquote. Then why didn't you fucking draw a second page? It is really interesting to see Lewis coming to terms with the flaws to his approach with comic book writing, and seriously considering the criticism of others though. I mean, again, many others would be quick to disregard anything anyone had to say about one's own work, with the default of most simply being to fight back against criticism. And while sometimes people who are criticizing your work don't always know what the hell they're talking about either, I like that this note seems to be an issue that Lewis himself has come to with his comic, and is perhaps something that will be fixed in the future ? It is interesting that he brings this up now, but he could have just as easily just made another page. At any rate, the next page takes us to another location, the Obelisk Square, and Carter is going out on a date with Sandy, and I gotta say, Carter and Sandy dating has been one of the weirder plot elements that's come up lately, primarily because Sandy was barely introduced at all in this comic. She was a friend of Michelle's, and I guess her and Carter are dating now. She was introduced, I believe, in the issue where it's all about Hannah, but only for like a page, like a panel of a page. But regardless, as far as I could tell, Carter and Sandy had never had any interactions before they started dating in the comic. But anyway, Carter then woos her with the words of Alan Moore. Quote, "Hey Carter, yeah? Tell me something good. Huh? You know, something decent or kind. What brought this on? I don't know. Just tell me something good. Okay, let's see. Oh, I know. Okay, when you were born, a million other kids could have resulted from another cell meeting that egg. Multiply that by the odds of your ancestors meeting and producing every person that eventually led to you, Sandy. The sheer impossible odds of that make you a miracle. To quote a hero, you are rarer than a quark and unpredictable beyond the dreams of Heisenberg, the clay of which..." Unquote. Which is something Lewis notes below. "Lord Byron, eat your heart out. I've got Alan Moore to give me romantic stuff." Unquote. This goofy ass nerd, I swear to fucking God. Well, anyway, then Hannah tells Lightbringer in another quick transition that she found out that the glove has the ability to reduce an object's mass to almost zero. When Lightbringer asks her how she found that out, she said that the internet was her friend. Then Lightbringer meets up with Miss Anal, and he tells her she doesn't need to do this, and that she used to be a teacher, and all that stuff that the Lightbringer somehow knows about. And so she sicks the fire demon on the Lightbringer. He blocks the demon's attacks and shoots his light beams at him. They continue to fight, Carter remarking how punching the creature is like punching a furnace. Then Power Glove comes in, tossing a car at Lightbringer while he's deflecting a fire attack, it blasting right into him. Then Bruiser readies his sniper rifle to take out General Wares once and for all while the Lightbringer is distracted with the fight, but is then beaten up by by a mysterious person. Then Lightbringer faces Legato, who he knows for some reason? Okay. So she slashes him up some, and he defends himself. Then Lacey, the little girl, comes in and slashes him as well, and Lightbringer is pissed now that a child has been brought into this. But then Anal comes in and punches him. Then the police chief corners Bruiser, and he recognizes him because he was a cop and blah blah fucking blah, you kind of get the picture. So it looks like Lightbringer is outmatched by all these superpowered fellas, who point out that if they don't kill General Wares, he will escape prison through some loophole or something, and that he must be killed. But then, just in the nick of time, Hannah Mentz comes in to help, ending the issue off. And according to Lewis, this plot point of Hannah becoming a Lightbringer's sidekick has been planned for over a year now, and he says that he wanted to do this for a character that's been treated so badly in the past, which I don't really know what he's talking about. I guess it feels like a bit of an overcorrection at this point, of something that was already overcorrected with her surviving that initial attack, like all the way back in issue 1. But it seems that one moment, when Carter left Hannah behind in that alley to die, seems to really still haunt Lewis up to this point. So at this point, he just wants to give Hannah as much as he possibly can to make up for it, I suppose. But whatever, just means that we get a second superhero character, so that's cool. There was apparently a hiatus at this point in the comic, so Lewis then drew this brief little story so far type page for everyone to enjoy. Then a couple months go by, and still no new Lightbringer stuff. So Lewis decides to tide everyone over with, this fan service drawing of Hannah Mentz. I figured I should do something to hold you over until new comics start. As such, here's some fan service for the heterosexual men, homosexual women, and bisexual both genders. Homosexual guys, sorry, but I'm fresh out of fan service. Of all the questions I could ask, I only have one. Why the cape? Unquote. Okay. But then, after another week, Lewis finally had the front page of issue 11 ready, and the epic conclusion to his 3-part story to be unveiled. So, right off the bat, Mrs. Anal Lemma sends the fire demon to go take out Hannah. But lucky for her, she emptied out all the contents of a fire extinguisher and put them into metal bombs of some sort to hurt the fire demon, which, Lewis notes, quote, "Yeah, Hannah's been planning this for a while," unquote. And yeah, that's actually pretty cool. Quite clever of Hannah to do this, and have this plan so that she can thwart her enemies, and how did she know there was going to be a fire demon? How could she have been planning this for a while if, she had no idea about any of these enemies? Nor did the Lightbringer, despite the comic trying to gaslight me into thinking that they did meet before, sometime besides just now. I mean, Power Glove and Anal met with him briefly, and I guess we're supposed to believe that he met up with the Clawed Hand girl at some point in the past off the page. But Hannah certainly hasn't met any of these people, and none of them have ever met Fire Demon until just right now. So, how could she have planned this out, let alone have planned it for a while? Well, I think I have the answer to that. See, Lewis made a real rookie mistake when he says that Hannah had been planning this for a while. What he really meant was he had been planning this for a while, but he forgot to establish how Hannah or Lightbringer knew or could plan for any of this, thus creating a solid plot hole. It makes sense that with the hiatus that he had, that he was planning out how Hannah was going to use different technologies and stuff to fight against these people. But in the actual context of the story, it doesn't make sense because she would have had like no time to see any of these characters at all. I won't harp on this too much after this, but I think it's another good example of remembering what you know versus what your audience knows versus what your characters know, all being very different things that you need to account for when writing pretty much anything. But anyway, Hannah starts kicking ass with the help of her newfound strength that comes from this power glove, which she enjoys greatly, tossing quips every second and remarking how someone should sing a cool theme song for her before she kicks their ass. But then this group's mastermind teleports them all away for now, since this was clearly too much for them to handle, I guess. Lightbringer is then quite proud of Hannah, but remarks that she will need her own original costume design if she's gonna be his sidekick, which she is very excited about. Meanwhile, the chief confronts Bruiser, and Bruiser remarks how he quit the force to go after the people that killed his kids, and he says that he should let him go, that after all, he knows what the chief did to all those that killed his family too. Damn, everybody has had their family killed in the series. But yeah, so he lets him go. Then we jump to the next night, where Carter and Hannah are talking about how Wares went crazy on the stand, and how he lost handily because he was, dumb, I guess. Man, all that build-up for this big trial and shit, all flushed down the drain. I mean, don't get me wrong, the trial wasn't the most interesting thing going on, but for it to have been handled completely off the page is kind of funny for how much it was being emphasized. At any rate, they then start discussing bringing Michelle into the fold and letting her know about all of this very soon. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure berates them for not defeating the Lightbringer or killing General Wares, and as he's ordering them around to do more stuff, Lacey throws a knife towards him and tells him she will be taking no more orders from anyone, which the figure just accepts, I guess, because the girl was scary? Question mark? So they then start thinking of a new plan, and then Lightbringer is summoned by the chief, and he just tells Lightbringer General Wares has been found guilty on all charges and will be sentenced tomorrow night at 3 a.m. in secret as to not getting any more public attention. Lightbringer then asks a favor of the chief, but we don't see what that favor is for now. Then, the next night, the group are set up again to kill General Wares when he exits the courthouse. But Lightbringer is here to try and talk to them into not doing this, to which Lewis has Lightbringer go on a grand speech about why not killing the criminals is actually morally just. Quote,
I am begging you, please don't do this.
I was wondering when you'd show up. Beg all you like. We're going to end this. Letting the monsters live so they can hurt more people? That's the world you represent, hero.
You all have such great ability and promise, and you squander it like this.
What, and be like you?
I don't think you realize how important we are. Those people out there, the ones we've sworn to protect on this insane quest of justice for all, they look up to us because they see what we should be, heroic, strong, and flying with the angels. We look up to them because we know they can and will be that way someday. They look up to us just as we look up to them. We're the ideal. We're the symbols of decency, of honor, of everything that people want with the world. We draw a line in front of the darkness, and we give it our all, not because the world can't do it, but so we can show them how to do it. And it's not about who can lift a car over their heads, or who can shoot beams of light, or who's smarter than everyone on the planet. It's about the symbol. We represent a world where you don't have to kill your enemies to beat them. A world where a person's very presence can prevent a crime. And a world that's like a utopia, not because of world peace or anything like that, but one where everyone is heroic, where everyone is brave and strong with both flesh and spirit, where our ideals are not just illusions or impossible dreams, but the true, real promise of tomorrow. And the simple fact of the matter is, we don't get to that world by becoming hypocrites.
Unquote. This is followed by a small author's note, again about how this page was inspired by what else but a debate over on the Comic Genesis forums. Quote, over on the forums, there was an ongoing debate occurring about the philosophy of a superhero engaging in no killing whatsoever. After about 4 pages, inspiration finally hit me about the reason for it, and we see it above. Simply put, Lightbringer wants to create a better world where there is no killing, and he doesn't want to be a hypocrite by building that future on the deaths of other people, no matter how malevolent or twisted. Unquote. These characters, however, are not convinced, and so Lightbringer decides to temporarily blind them by using his powers, so light cannot enter their eyes, which is kind of a pretty interesting ability he has, actually. And in the process of doing this, Legato turns against her own and knocks them all out. Then on the next page, it notes how these superpowered fellas will be contained, or in the kid's case, put through therapy. And the Lightbringer and Legato had apparently planned this beforehand, when the Lightbringer temporarily captured Legato in the last battle for an exchange for something in return. That something in return was for the Lightbringer to change her metal-clawed hands into her own once again, so she could play the piano one last time. Getting the piano here, by the way, was the favor that the Lightbringer asked of the chief. And so, through the use of the Lightbringer's light powers, he gives her her ability to use her hands as normal hands for a while. And for an hour straight, she plays a beautiful song, and ends up thanking the Lightbringer afterward, and what is actually one of the sweeter moments of the comic. The build-up for this one could have been a lot better though, if there had been an issue dedicated to the Lightbringer fighting Legato before this, since it was established that they knew about each other before this, or something like that. I think this would have hit even harder as a truly touching little moment. But it's still nice all the same. I appreciate the idea and the spirit of it, even if, again, narratively it could have been given more weight by introducing her sooner. So another day one, but uh-oh, what about that mysterious figure that was guiding the group before? Well, he suddenly comes and attacks the Lightbringer, and is revealed to be none other than the Darkbringer, which was, as it turns out, the very thing that the co-poet way back before was trying to warn the Lightbringer about, that he had escaped from his prison. Quote, "And another morning rises in Pharaoh City. Maybe it wasn't perfect for everyone, but it's good enough for me. I wonder how it is that those six met each other. I mean, how does a school teacher meet a mercenary? How do you think? Who had the knowledge to create the fire demon? Who else knew about the gangs and the people they hurt? Who had the connections to get an expensive mercenary here? And most importantly,
No.
who hates you enough to make them go after you?
Darkbringer!
And this time, there aren't any false angels here to save you." Unquote. Whoa, what's gonna happen next? How will the Lightbringer defeat the Darkbringer now that the Linkara is nowhere to be seen? Well, I suppose we'll find out in the next issue. And that is it for part 2 of the Lightbringer comic Retrospective. We only got one more part to go. It'll probably be a little bit shorter than these other two parts. And once again, I will eventually be putting these all into one giant video shortly after the third one's out. And I would rather get this stuff to you guys out more consistently than all at once. So there you go. After we're done with part 3 of the Lightbringer comic series, we'll be officially done with all the tangent stuff with the Lightbringer and Linkara, and we'll move on into actually talking about the Atop the Fourth Wall video series, and all the lore that comes with that, which is going to be quite the undertaking. And being real with you, you can probably expect a one-off internet fables about someone else in the middle of me making that Atop the Fourth Wall video. Who that one-off internet fables video will be about, I will leave that a secret for now, but I think you guys are going to really find it quite interesting, and it won't be something that you're expecting either. Anywho, if you gotten to the end of this video, be sure to like and subscribe because it really helps me out and cheats the algorithm, as they say. And thanks for watching. And of course, as always, I also want to give a special thank you to all of my loyal patrons and channel members for continuing to support me and my creative projects, including all of my night eggs and my night owlets, as well as a very special thank you to all my great night owls, including Sombra Devante, Hexmaniac Hannah, and Ho Hot, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the wise Nicodemus, the talented Cherry and GT, the always chi vibes Zen Garden Party, the daring Daniel Petrie, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the mysterious Mr. Gaming Sheep, the fearless Forgotten Ace, and the Supersonic Sword. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the channel, and until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.